Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Global South Women's Forum on Sustainable Development. This is hosted by ERO Asia Pacific. Before we start, we'd like to start off with a couple of virtual housekeeping rules. As participants, please turn off your videos and mute your microphones. If you are experiencing slow bandwidth, please close any unnecessary programs and/or applications on your device. Feel free to use the public chat box to engage with one another throughout the session. Please note that this session is live streamed on the ERO AP's Facebook page, and the recording will be available publicly afterwards. We are committed to making GSWF 2021 an inclusive and safe digital environment and will not tolerate harassment of any kind. Please take note this includes but is not limited to deliberate intimidation, sustained disruption of discussions. Participants are obliged to be respectful and to avoid replicating societal prejudices and inequalities. Participants who engage in disruptive behavior may be removed without prior notice. With that, I hand this over to Nadia.
Thank you, Rachel. And welcome everyone to our very first session of Global South Women's Forum 2021. We're really delighted to have you here today. And we look forward to a really amazing 5 days. We're going to start today with our first session as a cultural and creative session. And I'm really excited about that because I think it really sets the tone for what we want GSWF to be. It's not just about networking or panels, but it's about creating a space that's safe and comfortable and nourishing and exciting for people to spur creativity and connection. Today, I'm especially excited to host the cultural session because it's with my friend Deb, or my longtime online social media mutual Deb, who has written an amazing short story that I will link to shortly in the chat if anyone hasn't read it yet. But the way that we'll structure this session for today is Deb will begin with a short reading of a story for about 10 minutes. And then she and I will have an exchange about her creative process, the story itself, and the various contexts that led to it being written. And then we'll open the floor to questions or any sort of responses that anyone had to the story and the themes within it. I'd like to welcome Deb to the floor to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Augustin, and I'm a writer who was born and is raised in Malaysia. And I dream of a world where we all have freedom of movement. So I'm very excited to be here today. Should I start with the reading?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to thank you for your introduction, and please feel free to start the reading.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read 2 sections from the short story, and they take place over a span of about 10 years. 20 October 2060. I woke up hungover the day after Kuala Lumpur was supposed to end. At first, all I could understand was the sharp, heavy pain in my head. The outline of the room swam. A whole body achiness gripped me. Slowly, things started to register. My desk across from the bed, Eddie's face down next to me, his breathing still, deep with sleep. Then, the smell. A green fish tank dankness swirled in the air. A gust of it hit me as I sat up, and bile rolled up from my stomach. I clamped a hand over my mouth, swung my legs out of bed, and screamed. My feet had sunk into slimy water. What? Eddie was still groggy. He rolled over to look, and I fought the urge to vomit at the sensation of warm, viscous, ankle-deep water. Fuck, he said. I nodded. Fuck indeed. I felt him get out of bed and come around to my side to help me up and to the bathroom. The water, a murky brown against the white tile, splashed against our calves and made me shudder. He stood next to me and rubbed my back as I crouched over the toilet bowl, retching. It's okay, he murmured. Finally, I stood up, brushing away a string of vomit. He poured a dipper full of water into the toilet bowl. The plumbing's probably fucked, I said. Probably. He shut the toilet lid. We went to the kitchen. Eddie poured water from our last 6-liter bottle into the kettle. I sat down, resting my head on the kitchen table and propping my feet up on the seat of the chair across from me. The clink of a mug and the slow waft of heat roused me. Eddie slipped his arm around my shoulders. Drink, he said. It's too hot, I said, waving away steam as mint leaves floated to the surface. He sat down and sighed. A small bubble of anxiety surfaced through my hangover fog. Was he tired of me? As if sensing my unease, he stroked my back. I relaxed into his touch and blew on the steaming tea. Everything was still so new between us, but we'd never gotten to enjoy the honeymoon phase of a relationship. No pretending that you didn't fart or shit in front of your new partner. No agreeing to split a dessert you didn't care for because you wanted to win them over. No dates in restaurants. I leaned into him. It didn't happen. Again. It did for some people. We're pretty high up. If the water had reached my house, it meant the level had risen again. The images of what we would find came to me unbidden. People's lost treasures floating downward to the city. When would the body surface? Aren't you tired? His arm slipped down to my waist. Yes, I wouldn't have drunk so much if I knew we were going to wake up. I used to get drunk every weekend in college. Can you believe it? It's different when you're old. It's funny how 40 is old again, like medieval times. Let's go to the roof. It might stink less there. We splashed our way to the front door. Mrs. Chan from next door waved at us as she pushed the muddy water out of our house with a big brush. The few children left on our street waded through the water to float boats made from whatever rubbish they could find. Their parents had long since tired of warning them about playing in floodwater. The rain had cleared the air enough that we didn't need our gas masks. Eddie propped up the ladder we kept by the front gate and held it steady for me to climb. I crawled up the roof and onto the other side, which overlooked what had once been the city. I felt my chest tighten at the thought of what I would see. My capacity for sadness in these times always surprised me. Every time I thought I had steeled myself for the next loss, I found another small crack that allowed grief to seep in. I settled myself on the roof. A lifetime ago, when I was 20, I hosted a New Year's Eve party at my house. My friends and I walked to a part of Bukit Antarabangsa where we could see the fireworks flower above the city skyline. We stood and cheered on the new year as pink and purple lights flashed against the twin towers. The forward momentum of time still held promise then. Now, the city resembled a watery junkyard. Half of the twin towers still hulked above everything, like breaching whales frozen in time. The pod and antenna of KL Tower floated to their left, but the smaller buildings were all submerged now. At night, there would be no lights. I could hear Eddie inching up the roof behind me. Finally, he sat next to me, took my hand, and squeezed it. The houses down the hill, desirable about 5 years ago for being on an incline despite the landslide risk, were gone. The quiet of the aftermath pressed down on us, punctured only now and then by the shouts of the children below us. Every one of their shrieks rattled me. What do we do? He said finally. Is it worth it to keep going? I don't think I want to die. Not yet. I took his hand and kissed it. Not yet. 23rd April, 2050. A month before the big Earth Day action, Eddie had shown up to a meeting. Hey, I mouthed in surprise from the back of the room. I hadn't thought his sympathies went as far as direct action. He smiled back and wedged himself into the lone remaining seat near the door. Afterward, he stayed to catch up. Some of the younger kids said hello, shy and pleased to see him. Some of my students, he explained. Does Alia know you're here? You know how she feels about this kind of thing. Besides, I don't want to worry her. On the day of the protest, we found ourselves in the same marching group. Our plan was to walk from KLCC to Dataran Merdeka. Thanks to the crackdowns on environmental activism, there would probably be extra surveillance along the fabled route from what had once been the Sogo Mall to our meeting point. Not 5 minutes had passed and already 2 drones had buzzed above us. I watched our feet moving forward. It helped keep me from floating out of my body. When we were across the road from Dataran Merdeka, Eddie slipped his hand into mine and squeezed. I gripped it back, afraid to let go. It'll be okay. Stay close to me, he said. I nodded. I hadn't been to this part of town by foot in a long time. My eyes watered from the pollution. There were people hanging out by the Victoria Fountain across from Dataran. Some of them wore an N95 mask like us, others bandanas. I tried to identify the climate strikers among them and guessed that those watching the field closely might be with us. We walked down Jalan Raja past the domes of Sultan Abdul Samad building, our arms linked. Only a few feet stood between us and the barbed wire that snaked around the square. I could smell the spice of Eddie's cologne under his sweat. I found that I liked it. As we waited at the far end of Dataran Merdeka on a corner shaded by skinny palms, I looked around. There were others scattered nearby, fanning themselves and staring off into the distance. I saw a telltale green hem under a girl's white t-shirt and reminded myself to breathe slowly and deeply. Then 3 sharp blasts of a whistle pierced the heat. We poured out toward the field. People around me peeled off their disguises and revealed their green shirts in different shades. Those of us on the front line cut through the barbed wire, clearing our path. As we surged forward, I pulled out my Darurat Iklim Sudah Sampai banner. Eddie took a corner and we moved apart, stretching it between us. Hidup Bumi, Hidup Rakyat, someone in front of us shouted. I stepped into the glorious swell of the chant as everyone began to shout. My fear left me. Hidup Bumi, Hidup Rakyat. Sirens sounded just as a banner dropped from the Sultan Abdul Samad building. Eddie closed the distance between us. Our chant was interrupted by the steady drum of batons on shields in the distance, followed by the pop of tear gas canisters. I watched them spiral into the air, trailing smoke, but Eddie grabbed me and hustled me to the back. My legs moved before I could think to run, but not soon enough to escape the gas needling into our skin. We ran down Jalan Raja Laut and cut across the Jalan Tunku Abdul Rahman. I felt dizzy trying to run with my mask on and doubled over. Come on, Eddie whispered urgently. He pushed me onward. We burst into Jalan Masjid India, then collapsed onto the pavement. Eddie handed me a water bottle and I splashed it on my face and arms. An old auntie slipped us another bottle before hurrying away. Eddie handed me a handkerchief to wipe my face. We should go, he said. We changed in an alley where he pulled his shirt off, revealing the smooth brown expanse of his back. I looked away. Thanks for today, I said, once it felt safe to look at him again. He smiled. Anytime. And that's the 2 excerpts.
Thank you so much, Deb. That was excellent. Before we continue, I just want to welcome everyone who's joining us via Facebook Live. Thank you so much for being here with us as well. And please do feel free to engage in the chat or comments if you have any questions for Deb or anything that you'd like to share with us. The comments are being monitored. I'm really glad that we had a bit more time for you to read a longer excerpt today, because the protest section is probably my favorite part of the story, because it's, I mean, just personally, like obviously it's speaking to a very contemporary moment, right? It's set in 2040, if I'm not mistaken, that's the section, 2040, that decade, right? 2050, sorry. But yeah, it was just obviously overlaid with what the current political moment in Malaysia is. But before we get into the details of that, I just really love to hear about the genesis of this work. Like, where did this idea come from, and what your creative process was in coming up with this narrative?
Yeah. So last year I had this idea of two people waking up, the day after the world was supposed to end, in my mind. And in my mind, the original story idea was that two people who weren't really supposed to be together get together because they think the world is ending, and then what happens when the world doesn't end. So that was the beginning. And I started trying to work on this story that was about the aftermath of two people getting together who, for whatever reason, thought they shouldn't be together. But that didn't really work. And so I was playing around with structure, and I decided to tell the story backwards. So it begins in 2060 and it works back. Each section goes back until it's in the last section is set in 2040. So it's about 20 years that these two people, kind of come together in different ways, but not quite, they don't end up until towards the end of their lives, or what they think is the end of their lives. But yeah, the original story was thinking about, what happens when people who don't think they're supposed to be together get together. And that was sort of brought on by the pandemic in a way, because, in some ways, I think this time does feel like the end of the world, and it certainly feels like the end of something, right? And we are in a new world. Yeah, everyone keeps saying like we want to go back to we have to find a new normal, but I think what it just means is like some part of how things were has ended, and we're finding ourselves in this new reality. And I think I was thinking about like, what does that force people to do? Does it, make you do things that you wouldn't normally do? Does it unlock desires that you don't think you wouldn't normally have? Yeah. So that was kind of the beginning of the story.
That makes a lot of sense, the way that you're describing it. And what I'm thinking about this piece, right? Like it starts at what should be the end of the world, which gives it, just from the description, it has a very pessimistic premise, but there's a lot of hope throughout the piece, right? Like there's a lot of optimism, and just being in dialogue with what we're trying to do here at GSWF. You talked about about the new world, right? Like what people trying to go back to what it was before, but so much about what the work that ERA does and what a lot of people in the feminist movement are doing. We're trying to build back better. We're looking for a just recovery, and that isn't possible in the world that we were in before. And there's no saying that the pandemic was a good thing or a positive thing, but the fact of it is that it's happened, and now we're all together, kind of thinking through to the other side, right? And what I really loved about this piece is the specificity of it, of reading about KL, which is, in my experience, it's something really difficult to do, to write about a particular space and time well without beating people over the head with it. You didn't throw in 1,000 laughs to drive home the point that people are Malaysian. I got, Bukit Antarabangsa watching the fireworks. I've done something similar, talking about the food in a very organic, very natural kind of way. And I'm wondering how much of that, like how did that come about? Like the process of writing a story that's so specific to Malaysia, geographically, but also temporally, and presenting it to, an audience that goes beyond just jazz. Like how did you think about that really?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I think first of all, I was definitely writing for a Malaysian audience. I think that when I was writing, I wanted to make sure that it made sense to a Malaysian audience and that a Malaysian reading it would be like, oh, I recognize this place, right? I mean, it's set in the future, but like I can understand these places and that kind of thing. And that is, I think, a journey that I've been on for a little bit, because and an interesting reaction to the story was my mother's reaction, because she read it and she was like, how come you didn't put like a footnote for the words that are in Malay, or, that there isn't like some kind of explanation of things like pisang emas, or, that kind of, there is a little bit of Malay here and there. And yeah, people do speak in dialogue in Manglish, especially in the last section. But as you said, I don't put like so much of it that it's like really, like, I guess, popping out to you. And yeah, I mean, I think I have stopped wanting to try and explain my work to a wider audience. I mean, I do some kind of context clues. So like, in the story pisang emas, it's a type of banana, even if you don't know what exactly that type of banana looks like, or if you've not eaten one before. And that's okay. If you're not Malaysian, like, you just know it's a kind of local banana. And that's enough of a clue that I put in the writing, I think, for people outside of Malaysia to know. But it was very important for me that a Malaysian audience would understand and, appreciate and recognize the place that I was writing about. So it's been a journey for me since I was in grad school from 2015 to 2018, trying to figure out how to write a Malaysian story. And actually one thing is like, I think I have been thinking a lot, like, what does it mean to write a story outside of the white gaze? And for one, it meant not really describing people physically, to like tell people racially this is like a non-white person, which is something some of my Malaysian readers pointed out to me. They were like, yeah, you don't really like do that, but I know, like you name someone Mrs. Chan and I have an idea of who Mrs. Chan is, or there's a character named Alia with a Y, not an I, and I have a sense of who that Alia is. I don't know. So I just was really wanting it to be something authentic to a Malaysian audience, and I think that's what in the end is what helped me write it. Yeah, and not worry too much about what outsiders would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the sense that I got from your piece. Not knocking any other styles of writing about Malaysia or about Malaysians, but there's, as you said, there's like a tendency to, I mean, there's one thing to write for international audience where you're explaining everything. There's the constant debate whether a uniform which should be italicized and explained, and I go back and forth a bit about that, in literature, but also over pandering in a way to Malaysian audiences, where you want to be, I mean, it's understandable, we're not seen as much, so when you get the chance to make yourself seen, it's a very fine line, it's a very fine needle, I'm mixing up my metaphors, but it's a very fine line to walk, and I think you did that really wonderfully, and I really love that. And what I wanted to ask you is that the story that you're talking about, you did say it was inspired by the pandemic, and it is about, as you said, two people who don't think they should be together, being thrown together by unexpected circumstances, right? I think that's a fairly universal story, and I was wondering why climate fiction specifically? What drew you to this genre? Like, like it's interesting that you use the phrase cli-fi. I think you were the first person I think that used that phrase that I came across, even though I realized that I read a lot of it. I read, like Emily St. John Mandel, and K. Jemisin, but obviously these are, not Asian writers. So seeing it from a Malaysian and Asian context was really interesting. So I was just wondering why this genre to tell that story.
Mm-hmm. I have been thinking quite specifically about the role of art in the climate crisis for a few years now. So I think that's why I was drawn to try and my hand at climate fiction or cli-fi. Yeah, so for the last 3 or so years, like I've been grappling with my own climate anxiety and grief. And I really did feel that as a writer, like the most important thing that I can do is try and write about the climate crisis. And so, yeah, I've spent some time thinking what makes good climate fiction and attempting it. So this was my first try at trying to write about the climate crisis, and there was like a line I was walking, because I mean the story I think is a reflection of my politics, and that I do believe that we need to take collective action to face the climate crisis and to mitigate what is about to come, what is already happening. And I think that those politics, I read the protest section, are definitely evident in the story. So it's very much informed by my politics and by my desire to try and do something about the climate crisis. So yeah, that's kind of what got me interested, because like it is quite far out of what I typically write. I've typically only written things set in the present day, in our world, contemporary life, and so this was like kind of a departure for me in terms of like what I write about.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting to get some insight in, your process really, and what you're saying about what you said about us needing to support each other through this. That's absolutely true. We have a comment on Facebook from someone saying that mutual aid is going to be vital for our survival, right? Would you mind saying a bit more about what you think? Because you just said that you were thinking about what kinds of actions are going to be needed of us to kind of get through this. And I'm fairly new to this space, or at least thinking in depth about these things, but it sounds like you've put a lot of thought into this, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Like what's the way forward here? Whether it's through, whether you want to talk about it through the lens of your fiction or through art, or in just a more general sense.
That's, I think politically we need like very drastic action to face the climate crisis. I think that a lot of states are in denial about the reality, or they are responding in a security lens type of way. So, I think the West, for example, like the United States, the countries in the EU, England, or the United Kingdom in general, they're responding to the climate crisis by hardening their borders and by using a security lens. That's how they're responding to the climate crisis. And I think the rest of us, I think people in those countries need to push back. If you really believe in a just world, you need to be thinking about changing that way of anticipating the climate crisis. I think here in the Global South, and this is a Global South Women's Forum, I think that there needs to be a lot more cooperation between states. And I think even within communities, like we need to start, I think we've all been very segregated from each other. The idea of community is often like really restricted to just like who we are related to familially, and but I think we really need to start thinking in a more community oriented way. I think that is the only way forward. And I think that the pandemic has given us in some ways in which we can start thinking about how to organize ourselves in that way. Like I think in Malaysia, we've really seen the failure of the state to care for people. And so people have tried to step in and, provide really basic services like food aid and, try to help people access medical care and things like that. And I think we have to, unfortunately, anticipate more state failure for a lot of us in the Global South. And I think that we have to start working on how we're going to take care of each other in the impending climate crisis. So I think, you know, the pandemic is a preview, I think, of what is going to be the future. Sorry to be, you know, very pessimistic on a Sunday, but I think it's a preview, and I think that, you know, we're seeing how governments will respond, which is like badly, and so I think in the absence of, you know, a state being able to take care of you, like we only have each other, and I think that we need to start collectively organizing, you know, to care for each other, and that can be in many ways, whether that is like learning how to grow food together, whether that's like learning how to just care for each other emotionally and mentally, which is a big thing, you know, making space for all the hard emotions, and also to remember to come together and celebrate joy. I think that's like an important part of all this, is that we have to remember to come together and celebrate the good things as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of along the lines of what I'm thinking these days.
Thank you for that, Deb. Yeah, I mean, I love this point about joy, especially because your piece, you know, there is, you know, it is the end of the world, so there is pessimism in it, but there's also like a really beautiful, intimate scene with two lovers, and I think you get to the heart of what makes these times tolerable, right? It's the connections that we build. You know, the story goes backward chronologically, and you see these two people sort of gravitating to each other in a very slow, roundabout way, and ultimately finding that comfort with each other. And I think, you know, it links to the concerns that I've been thinking about with the state's responses to the pandemic as well, about how joy, you know, the moralization of joy or expressions of joy, but how it's being used as a, you know, as a cudgel, really, to kind of extend the state's reach. I don't know if I'm not making very much sense, but I'm just thinking about how the government or states have outsourced this scolding behavior to people, to kind of tell people to keep each other in line, and then like kind of deny the significance of what we've lost over the past year and a half, like beyond deaths, beyond illness, all these things. What we've lost is the ability to yeah, as you said, have these connections and have these moments of joy, because that's seen as frivolous, that's seen as extraneous and not necessary. But obviously that's immensely critical to I mean, if it wasn't critical to the work that we're doing, it still has value in and of itself, right? Yeah, I just find that really, really fascinating that you brought that up, because I think it's super critical in what we're doing. But I wanted to say also, before I forget, like I really loved the imagery of the sunken twin towers as well, because you were talking about the failures of the state, and I think nothing stood out for me as much as that, like just the image of, yeah, like this bloated sign of you know, state failure. I'm trying to think of I had another question for you, but like my brain's a bit scattered right now, because you've just given me like a lot to think about. You mentioned that you've been thinking about writing this cli-fi for a while. Do you have more work like this planned? Like, is this something that you want to keep exploring? Because what, you know, our mutual friend Nine and I were talking about your story earlier, and we both said that we would love to read a book about this, right? Like this is like what, you know, what's missing, I think, in the conversation, at least from this perspective. So I'd really love to hear if you have like any other, you know, creative works planned around this, or whatever you have planned for the future.
The story is being expanded into a novel, as it's about, I have about 22,000 words now, but yeah, it just kept growing, and yeah, I think I'm going to keep working on that. I'm hoping to have at some point next year a full-length novel of like from this story. Yeah, so fingers crossed. There will be more to read.
I mean, I would be delighted to have that available. I think we can open to, there are a couple of questions in the chat, if you don't mind us switching over to that now.
Sure.
Connie is saying that she would love to hear more about your reflections on the role of art in collective action and crafting demands on state and other actors. If you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think art is essential. I think that it's so important to imagining the future. I think that's partly why I started thinking about writing something set so far in the future. I mean, but when you think about it, like 2060, it's frighteningly not that far into the future. You know, it's a time that we may live up to, right? Like hopefully, or and so it's 2060 is within our lifetimes. And I think that you know, again, going back to this idea of joy, it's important to imagine that joy is possible, like another way is possible. And I think that art is very powerful in allowing people to imagine that and work towards it, you know. So I think that it's you know, I mean, I think that art shouldn't be didactic. Like I really didn't want to be like moralistic with this story. And
I don't think you were at all, so.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't think art should, I mean, I think like, you know, there all art is political and there's bad political art. And I don't think that art should like, you know, be like a blueprint, but I do think like imagining a more just society is important. And I think art can do that. It can open it. And yeah, I think that, you know, just, I think everybody deserves beauty. You know, one of like an amazing song that is part of like the labor movement is Bread and Roses, like give us bread but also give us roses, and art is always going to be important to sustain us. So yeah, I think art is very essential to imagining what the alternative might be to the current world that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great way to put it, because I feel the same. Like there's so much, I love that you just said there is bad political art for sure. And I am not a fan of didactic writing either, but it does give us this space to sort of think about what could be, right? Like even reading your story, I admit that I am a little bit blinkered when I think about the climate crisis. Like I'm engaging with it on a day-to-day basis in terms of work and things like that. But reading 2060, you're right, it didn't feel so far away, and I couldn't sort of, there was no way to take myself out of the story because, you know, God willing, like I'll still be around at that point. And it was a very vivid experience of looking at it and imagining myself in that position. And then I think the way that you did it with reverse chronological order was really effective as well, because you put me as the reader, you know, you're in the position of imagining this, you know, fairly devastating future where you're sort of waiting for the end, but then rolling back and seeing that the opportunities to make that change are still ahead of me. Like, I mean, now it begins now, right? Like that's where the moment is. Like it's not somewhere, it's not too late. I think that's a huge part of what Era's ethos is, but also what GSWF is about, because there's a lot of fatalism around the conversation of environmental justice. I think there's a lot of assumptions that we, you know, just giving into very nihilistic thoughts. And I think the work that art like yours is doing is sort of saying that it's coming from a very pragmatic point of view of saying that, yeah, these are the possibilities, but you cannot discount your role in it as well. And this brings me to a point from Priyanthi in the chat, where she said that she agrees with the idea of collective action, but, you know, can we absolve the state from the obligations? And I'm not sure that that's what we're saying, right? We're not saying absolve the state, but, you know, if you want to respond to that comment.
Yeah, I don't think we should absolve the state of its responsibility to its citizens. I think that I think in abolishing some of the ways that society is organized now, around the nuclear family will require the state to have more responsibility for its citizens. I feel that, as we live under neoliberal capitalism, we're again, I like go back to being isolated. We are encouraged to think of ourselves as individuals, or the only people who we can rely on are our immediate family members, maybe. And I think that is a way the state abdicates its responsibility to its citizens, because then, they don't have to provide welfare for people who are older and disabled, or, or children who may need welfare from the state. So I really, in dreaming of a world where we are more collectively organized, I think that it does mean that we expect more social protection from the state. So I think that we need to do both things. I think that we need to think about how we can organize ourselves collectively and be taking care of ourselves collectively. But we will need to push the state as well to provide the protections and welfare that we need. So I think it's not an either or situation. It's like a both. It's I expect both. Yeah.
I think that's very fair. Connie's just sharing from the Facebook chat from the Aishwan, which is our colleague Audrey, that a new relationship with the state feels like part of our clarion call, and I would absolutely agree. I've been talking a lot, and I would love to open the floor to anyone who has any questions that they'd like to ask directly, or if you have any responses to the story of what we've discussed today. Please feel free to unmute directly and speak.
Hi, Deborah. Great to meet you. I was really happy to hear that you were intending to continue the story, like in a longer form, and so that brought me to this question of stakes. I mean, in terms of the plotting, like. And in a way, the consequences of, in the background with the climate situation. So yeah, I was just kind of wondering, like, in terms of stakes, how do you balance that and move the plot along while still, being reflective of this, the cost, whether it's to the individuals in the story, but also to the larger society. Thank you.
One of the challenges of writing a novel is that I'm not a very plot-driven writer. I tend to, I think I start with like a mood or a, I think more thematically, I think, as a writer. And in some ways, the structure I've chosen helps a lot because I'm moving backwards, in time. So, and the story, having written the short story first, is also very helpful because it's acted as like these key points in the longer work that I have to get to, basically. So, and I am writing it backwards. So I'm not beginning with the early stuff. I'm like starting from 2060 and working backwards to these key points that I've laid out already in the short story. And I think it's interesting way to do it because it sort of, it kind of turns upside down, I think, the way that I've typically written. Because you know how it ends already at the beginning of the story. So how do you still keep the reader engaged? And I think it's about then really showing the development of these characters and how they reached that endpoint, right? Like what happened to them before that led them to the endpoint that you meet them at in the beginning of the novel. So yeah, I think that, I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's been about, you know, looking at how these characters developed into the people that they are at the end, at the beginning of the novel, or at the end of their lives, or the end of the story, and yeah, what happened that is who they are. So I guess I focused on that side of things in terms of like the plot and the stakes. Yeah, that is kind of how I work. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, that's how I'm thinking about writing the story.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I realized that I actually missed this question that I wanted to ask earlier in the chat, which is just what is your actual creative process when you're writing? How do you write? Do you have a routine? Do you have, like, because you talk about thematically, right? Which I can relate to. Like I don't write creative fiction, but I write academically or other things. And it's kind of the same, no thoughts, just vibes, just going into it and just, just seeing what comes. Like I know other people write in a very structured way. But because the text that you're working with, there's so much going on that it's really rich, and you're dealing with very real issues. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of saying it, but like this big issue of the climate crisis, and especially reading sci-fi, which takes, as someone who loves sci-fi, there's so much plotting and narrative and world building that goes into that, right? So I'm actually just curious of what your writing process is, and also if you have any writers that you particularly love, or I mean, not emulate, but anyone who is you draw inspiration from.
In terms of process, I try to sit down, and the key word here is try. I try to sit down and write for 25 minutes a day. That is like it's I'm sure everyone knows that's like a Pomodoro technique thing. But yeah, I set like I can do one Pomodoro a day. That's like, okay, great. And then I try not to do more than that, Monday to Friday. I try, I mean, there are weeks where I don't write at all for work and all that gets in the way. But yeah, that my process is really that I just sit down and write for 25 minutes. With this novel, I've had to think about, I have done a bit more planning. And again, I'm not a very like plot or like I have friends who write outline, like very detailed outlines. They'll like, do a lot of character study first. And I'm not really like that. I did, start writing in a notebook things like everything I wanted to happen in the novel, and then like narrow it down to like a smaller list of things that need to happen. The things that I want to see in development for the character. So I have done some more like outside of actually just writing. I have done some planning and things like that. But yeah, it's my process is like I sit down and write for 25 minutes, and I try to just keep writing and not try and edit myself too much in those 25 minutes. And yeah, sometimes I will go back, and at the end of the week, if I'm looking at a section, like then I might edit a little bit. And in terms of writers that I emulate, I'm still looking like for references, people who have done, climate fiction in the global South, which is what I'm really interested in. But, a guiding principle for me has been The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh. I read that after I started working on the short story. So I think I'd already submitted the short story for publication. And then I read The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh. And in this book, it's a series of essays. I think they were like originally lectures by that he gave, and they're now collected into this book, The Great Derangement. He asked the question, why there isn't more fiction about the climate crisis in what he calls serious literary fiction. and as I said, like I was writing like about contemporary life and typically, and then I decided to write this cli-fi story. So he says, yes, like people are writing about the climate crisis in science fiction and climate fiction, and cli-fi has emerged as this new genre. But, you know, for like, when I try to explain this to non-writers, I'm like, that's considered genre fiction, you know, science fiction, cli-fi, and you know, literary fiction is its own thing and is kind of considered more prestigious. Like like the big writing prizes tend to go to writers who write literary fiction, quote unquote. And I've had my own snobbery about lit versus genre fiction, and I've just had to dismantle all that for myself. And, you know, I think to some extent literary fiction doesn't always like present itself as the best format to tell climate fiction stories. But I've been thinking about the principles that he mentions in The Great Derangement. And one of them is chronology. I mean, I instinctively chose this backwards chronology because I felt like that would infuse the story with the kind of melancholy I wanted it to have. But it actually ties in with something he has to say about how, you know, this we tend to associate progress with a forward trajectory in time. We assume like that, you know, things will get better as we go on. And obviously that's not true. You know, things can get worse. You know, the future doesn't always mean progress. And so I think in a way, using that backwards chronology has worked in that sense too, because it shows you the future which hasn't gotten better, and works backwards to these sort of windows of when we could have made things better. Yeah, so I think my influences, I would say I'm theoretically thinking a lot about what Amitav Ghosh said, and I've been trying to find other writers who are kind of doing what I would consider good climate fiction, because I've read bad climate fiction, which tends to be kind of like sometimes, you know, wish fulfillment, or it really doesn't center the climate. Sometimes the story is good, but I would not really say that the climate is that obvious in the story. So yeah, I think a lot of writers are trying to grapple with what actually makes good climate fiction, or what is good writing about the climate crisis.
Yeah, that made me think of, I don't know if you've read Weather by Jenny Ophel.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, go on.
Yeah, I think in somebody who recommended that to me said that she felt that it was responding to Ghosh in the way that it was written, which is, you know, it's written in fragments, basically. It's not told chronologically, really, and you know, there are certain threads that keep going throughout the book, but it's largely told in fragments, and it's, you know, it definitely gives you that feeling of like constant climate anxiety and dread. And the person who recommended it was like, I don't know if I would say that I enjoyed it, but I thought it was good. So, you know, so that was I did read Jenny Ophel's you know, Weather, and I think it is a successful work of climate fiction, and in what is considered serious literary fiction.
Yeah, that was actually just the first thing that came to mind, because it's not just cli-fi, but it's about grappling with cli-fi as a writer as well. Like there's the element of that struggle with it. So it's really interesting to hear that you think it's responding to the Ghosh book, which I haven't read, but I will definitely be looking up now. Oh gosh, I had another thing that I wanted to ask you, but I've completely forgotten. But there's a question in the chat from Audrey just asking about the difference between, I guess, sci-fi and cli-fi, which if you wouldn't mind just saying a little bit about.
Well, I think cli-fi is like a subset or subgenre of science fiction broadly. And so science fiction can encompass lots of different things, but then cli-fi is specifically responding or like about climate change and yeah, and the climate crisis. So yeah, and I guess it would be maybe focusing more on the science aspect of it. But yeah, I would say that yeah, cli-fi is a subgenre of science fiction more broadly.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that would be my definition as well. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see, how, as you said, this question of the climate moves into serious literary fiction. As someone who loves genre, like I've always struggled with talking about that. Like I love sci-fi, and there's so much amazing work out there, which I don't have to convince you of, obviously. But I know we're running out of time, but just and that's something that this reminds me of. This is not climate fiction, but it's Patricia Lockwood's "No One Is Talking About This." I don't know if you've read that.
I've heard of it, but
yeah, it's not about sci-fi, but it is about social media and being in the social media moment. And it kind of, when you talked about the Great Derangement, that's what it made me think of. This kind of, we're being suffused with all this, overwhelming information on a day-to-day basis, but our capacity to respond to it and to engage with it in a meaningful way is being sapped, I feel. And I think that's not a new argument at all about social media, but obviously Patricia Lockwood, the way that she does it, I think it's done in quite a humane way. And I think as someone, it's in two halves. So the first half of the book, it's very online, in whatever that means. And it takes a lot of understanding of online culture. But I think for me, a lot of the way that we think about climate activism in very fatalistic ways or think about the future is tied into how social media has shaped the discourse. I don't know if that makes sense. And that's probably like a different conversation entirely. But yeah, I just want to say that that's what it made me think of. We've only got a couple minutes left, and I just want to check if anyone else has anything that they like to share in the chat. Otherwise, I'm happy to thank Deb for her time. I think, yeah, I don't think we have anything that we haven't covered in the chat. But yeah, I think that's all time we have for today. But I could talk to you about this for another hour, honestly. I think it's super interesting. And your insights on the way forward are really, I would love to dive into that some other time. We can do that over Signal or Instagram or something.
Yes,
but yeah, thank you so much for, first of all, for submitting your amazing story. Like, we're really, really pleased to have it be part of GSWF, and for being so generous with your time today. And this has been like a really fruitful discussion. I think Priyanti is asking if you can put some of the references to other pieces that, or is she asking me? I can do that, Priya. I'll do that in a bit. But yeah, thank you so much, Deb. If there's any last words that you'd like to share with anyone before we close.
I think that's it from me. Thank you so much for having me as part of this. It's yeah, I've really enjoyed being able to talk to you about all these things, because I'm always thinking about them, but I don't always have people to talk about them with. So it's great to find someone else who wants to talk about these things. Thank you.
No, it's awesome. We've really benefited from your insight and your knowledge on this. So yeah, thank you for your time. I think that's all we have for today. I will put the references I mentioned shortly in the chat. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
I hope we'll see you for the rest. Yeah, I hope I'll see everyone for the rest of the sessions.